Good evening. This is the Weekly Roundup Hockey Edition. My name is Sean Coles, and I'm here with my friend Ryan Lake. And we're going to start off with doing just a weekly roundup of how the Canadian teams did last week. So first team up that I think we might talk about is the Toronto Maple Leafs. They started off the week with a good win against a rather undermanned Predators team with a 6-2 win. Played Florida next, won 6-1, and then finished off the week against Montreal with a 2-1 loss. What do you think, Ryan?
I didn't really catch much of the Predators game. I was kind of wondering what was going to happen with that game because there was kind of an undermanned Predators team, but at the same time, I wanted to see how the speed versus the tenacity and toughness that Nashville plays.
Absolutely.
It was, like I said, I caught most of the highlights. I didn't expect it to be the 6-2 final that it was. I was really expecting a closer game than it was.
They had a pretty bad backup in that. He got shelled, and his numbers just aren't great in general. So it's not like they were playing against Pekka Rinne.
Right, and, who's to say that the outcome would have been any different if he was in net? But at the same time, it was a little bit surprising for me. But what was more surprising for me was the 6-1 win against Florida.
Florida was just bad. Just plain bad in that game. And Toronto was able to take advantage of that.
And it didn't help that, Optimus Rhyme didn't play very well in his homecoming.
No, I felt a little bad for Reimer in that one. Not that badly, but badly enough. No, you know what? It was a pretty good game by Toronto. They were able to take advantage of a poorly playing team. Normally, like you look back earlier in the season, they got up 4-0 on Winnipeg and then
lost that game. Yeah.
Lost in overtime.
Now, what do you think about Mitch Marner's beautiful goal?
Ooh, what a goal, man. Watching him last year in London playing for the Knights, he used a lot of those same skills in his puck protection, and that's what it is. It's his body movement, where he places his body, and how he protects the puck from defenders.
Yeah, and John Cherry pointed out that, for being kind of an undersized guy in the NHL, he does the right things with the puck to avoid the injuries. When he's about to get hit up against the boards, he kind of flattens out against the boards to absorb the hit, doesn't take the hit 2 or 3 feet away that's going to injure him, and that shot that he had, the breakaway, it was unbelievable. He skated, defenseman on his back. It was one of the goals that I haven't seen in a few years of hockey.
Still managed to cut across the crease like that at the last second. Clearly, Reimer wasn't prepared for that, but how many players could pull that off?
Right. That's one of those moves where it was speed and skill, right?
Which, of course, is why he routinely gets compared to Patrick Kane. I love Patrick Kane as a player. He has his own issues off the ice, obviously. That's well documented. But he is just an unbelievable player, and if Mitch Marner can be anywhere close to that over the length of his career, I'm not expecting 3 Stanley Cups. That's a little too much to hope for a Leafs fan right now. But if he can keep progressing, he's scoring at almost a point-a-game pace. He's got to start scoring on the road. That's the main thing. That's where the Leafs need to start getting a little better, which is part of the reason why I think they've been struggling against Montreal lately as well. The 2 games they've played have been in the Bell Center. They don't play as well on the road, and part of that is because when they're at home, they get the preferred matchups.
Yeah, well, they get the second line change, right? They get to choose that. Now, so far this year, they've both been in the Bell Center, but with Montreal's win on Saturday, that's 12 straight against the Leafs.
That is 12 straight.
That's back to 2014.
Yeah, that's a long win streak, and but you know what? If a Leafs team is going to break that, I think it's going to be this one. They've got enough high octane offense that I think they could do it if they can get back home, get the preferred matchups, get that second line with Bozak, JVR, and Marner rolling like they tend to do at home. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, and anything else?
Hope to God that Price isn't playing.
Well, Price, I think, will always play those because those usually tend to be the Saturday night games, and those are the games that Price usually always plays.
Yeah, that is true. But, hey, fingers crossed that he gets injured from a Leafs perspective.
As a hockey fan, though, with fingers crossed that he doesn't.
Yes, of
but
course.
Speaking of Carey Price, we'll move on to Montreal next.
Absolutely.
Who their current record now is 14-3-2. This week they lost to Chicago 3-2. They lost to Florida 4-3 in overtime with a lucky bounce for Florida.
There were a couple of lucky bounces for Florida in that game.
And then they beat the Leafs, as we just discussed, 2-1. What do you think about Montreal this week?
Rough week for them. Rough week, I would say. If I'm not mistaken, 2 of those losses were with Al Montoya in net.
Yes.
Which is when they seem to lose. It was with Carey Price. The Florida game, that's an interesting one because, yes, a couple of bounces didn't go their way. They were at home as well, so it was their first home loss of the season.
Now, did you see the game-winning goal?
Yes, I did.
Bounced off of a broken stick.
Yes, very fluky goal, but you know what? These things happen.
They do.
And that's just part of the game. And eventually all those things even out. But if I'm not mistaken, I think Montreal's been getting a lot of bounces going their way this season. Might have been time for 1 or 2 to go the other way in that regard. But those things even out.
Teams aren't expected to stay undefeated for the regular season.
And they still got the pity point. Right.
And they're still playing well. I think they're last I checked, they're 5th in goals for the league. Once they solidify the back end a little bit more, and they get better backup goaltending from Montoya. Started the year perfect, 3-0. Lost 10-0. Kept him in the whole game.
He's had a bit of a rough ride lately, that's for sure.
But the games, versus the Hawks, versus they
well, and you know what, like the Hawks, that's a close game.
And it was also on a back-to-back as well.
Yeah, and you know what though, the Hawks, they're on a different level from a lot of teams, and they are just solid right through the lineup. And if anyone's going to give them a chance to win, it's Carey Price, but that is a tough team to beat for anyone in the league.
That's true. They've been playing well, and it's kudos to their general manager there for Chicago.
Stan Bowman jumps through hoops and uses as many loopholes as Lou Lamoriello to get his team where it needs to be. But yeah, they finished off the week with a pretty decent win against the Leafs. Very even game though. That's the surprising thing.
The shots were even. I think the shots were 32-29 for Toronto at the end of the game. And there wasn't any really spectacular saves either way. It was a pretty evenly matched. I think the difference really in the game was Toronto scored a power play goal, Montreal scored a power play goal, but Montreal got the even strength goal, which happened to be the difference, right? So it was a pretty even game. It was a fun game to watch.
Which it's almost more of a testament to the Leafs that they've been able to push Montreal like they have so far in the two games that they've played this season. But you know what? We'll see what happens going forward with Montreal. They'll probably be one of the top teams in the league, provided injuries don't start to hit them. And they haven't had much in the way of injuries yet.
Not yet, and never wish anyone gets hurt, but fingers crossed that if someone does go down, it's not Carey Price.
And that's not long term.
And it's not long term, yeah. And it hopefully it's something that they can rebound from, and not have what happened to them last year. And then with that, I'll let you go on to the next team.
Yeah, we'll go on to Ottawa at this point. They currently have a record of 10-7-1, which is actually a little bit surprising for them in the sense that they're a team that can go either way. They're either going to be good or they're going to be really bad.
Especially with their issues with their goaltending. Not saying that the goaltending's bad, but with Craig Anderson being out.
Speaking of goaltending, Hammond was waived.
Yeah, and he originally he refused. He didn't want to go to the AHL, but he cleared waivers and he's going to report to their AHL team. I believe it was Binghamton. Yeah. So they are. So he, that's
surprising that no one claimed him. Really, because he's a half decent goalie. You would have thought that a team that might be hurting for goaltending right now might have picked him up. LA is the usual one, but hey, you never know with maybe Vancouver.
Yeah,
as well.
I feel like maybe teams were thinking that it was a one-hit wonder, that the start to his career was something that hasn't replicated since, and maybe they just didn't really want to take the risk on it.
He also does not play behind a very defensively sound team.
No,
because let's put it this way: this is the team that traded for Dion Phaneuf. I like Dion. He's not that great a defenseman anymore. And he's in their top 4.
Yeah,
he's solid, but he is slow. He doesn't have that foot speed for this game.
He is slow. But at the same time, I feel like as good of a defenseman as he used to be in Calgary, he's nowhere near that anymore. But I think he's still playing a little bit better than when he did in Toronto.
Well, in Toronto, he had a lot more responsibility, played a lot more minutes. Obviously, he's behind Erik Karlsson in that regard. So that
and he had more pressure on his back in Toronto as well.
Absolutely,
the media scrutiny there was kind of tore him apart, to be honest.
Absolutely. So just to go over their games from the week, they played the Wild. They lost 2-1 in overtime. They next played the Flyers, where they won 3-2 in the shootout. Then they played the Predators, lost 5-1, and played the Panthers and lost 4-1. That is a rough week.
Yeah, it was a different Predators team than the Leafs played.
Yes, well, they had Pekka Rinne in net.
But the Flyers game, I watched parts of that game. It was a pretty good game, to be honest. It was
it's two teams that are in the same spot. Either they're going to be really bad or they're going to be pretty decent.
Yeah,
they're very much on that bubble.
Ottawa to me is just one of those teams where you always look at them and they're never in a playoff spot, and then all of a sudden the end of the season comes and Ottawa's charging up the ranks, getting close to a playoff spot. So, I don't know how they're going to do this year. Depending on Craig Anderson has been back. He's been playing a few games, but with the whole thing with Nicola's wife going on, there's a little bit of an issue with the goalies. I'm sure
they brought in Mike Condon to steady that position.
Right, but at the same time, you don't really have a true number one when Craig Anderson's not there. How is that going to go for the whole season? It kind of depends how that's going to roll for the rest of the year there.
Yeah, that will be interesting to keep an eye on and see if they can maybe squeak into the playoffs in the 7th or 8th spot, one of the wild card spots. But you know what? We'll have to see how that goes. And if they don't have Erik Karlsson scoring 80 points and Craig Anderson keeping them in games and stealing them a lot of games, I don't know how well they're really going to do.
And with the emergence of a lot of other teams in the East that were bottom teams, it's going to be tough for them to squeak in. So we'll have to we'll follow them up every week as we go here, but something that's definitely going to have to we'll have to keep our eye on.
I would like to see at least one Canadian team make it in the playoffs this year.
I'd like to see 7.
Might be a little unrealistic.
But one can hope.
Yes, one can hope. I think Montreal is pretty well a lock this year for making the playoffs, but hopefully Ottawa and hey, God forbid, maybe the Leafs.
They're not far off. If not this year, it'll be the next year or two for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so going on to our next Canadian team, we have the Winnipeg Jets, who finished off the week with a record of 9-10-2. They played 5 games, busy week for them. First game was against the Kings, where they won 3-2 in the shootout. Next game was against the Hawks, won 4-0. That's a pretty good result for them.
Especially against the Hawks.
Especially against the Hawks, because that is a really good offense that they've got, and solid defense as well. So be able to put 4 goals past them is pretty impressive. Things went a little downhill for them after that, though. Played the Flyers, lost 5-2. Played the Bruins and lost 4-1, and then played the the Hurricanes, I should say, Carolina, and lost 3-1. Not really a great ending to the week.
Yeah, I feel like they were riding a super emotional high after the 4-0 win over Chicago, because whether it's Crawford in net or Darling in net,
two solid goalies.
It's the team in front of them doesn't really change. Yep. So their Stanley Cups prove that. I feel the biggest issue with Winnipeg right now is their injuries. They have one of their main defensemen in Tyler Myers. He's out. He's day-to-day with a lower body injury. Sean Matthias, he's out. He's on the injured reserve with another lower body injury. Drew Stafford's out. Brian Little's out. Perreault's out. The majority of some of their more reliable, dependent guys that put up points for them.
Their bottom 6 forwards that flesh out the lineup, their top bottom 6 forwards seems to be are injured, which is not going to help. And then when you got one of your top 4 defensemen and Tyler Myers out, doesn't help either. But you also have Jakub Trouba.
Right.
ready to step in there. He needs the playing time. It's good for him. It's going to boost his trade value if it ends up coming to that, So hopefully they can fight through it, and you know what? Trouba, despite what he has said, wants to be traded. So the more playing time he gets, the better.
Yes, but that could also lead to some of the results because he hasn't really played or done much for the whole first month of the season. And when you have other defensemen out and he's relied upon when might not have his legs underneath him from not having the game speed, it's plus not to mention they are rolling with younger goalies.
Absolutely.
So it's going to be another one of those things where. The last 3 games they lost, I don't think Laine had a goal in any of those games.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, he's going to have to continue to keep up his scoring pace if Winnipeg is going to want to win some games.
Which is a lot to expect of
an 18-year-old.
Yeah. He's a rookie. You can't rely on him to put up 50 goals at this point in his career. If he gets 40, which the way he's going is certainly possible, you know what? Good on him. And he probably will win the Calder Trophy this year, but that's a lot to ask of one of your youngest players to try and lead your team in scoring.
That's a lot to ask for anybody not named Ovechkin.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be interesting to see how they do over the rest of the season. Especially going with their younger goalie tandem. They decided to evidently go the Anaheim route, who last year went with the 2 young goalies. Well, younger goalies, I should say, and it worked out in the long term fairly well for them. But you know what? Anaheim's got a far better defense in front of them than what Winnipeg has.
Yeah,
so it's a bigger ask of them to be relying on 2 young goalies.
It is, and young, very I wouldn't say inexperienced, but not a lot of experience.
They're unproven,
and they're facing decent amount of shots per game. And at the same time, they don't have the huge, solid defensive core in front of them to deflect most of those shots. Or, if they still face 30 shots, maybe clear lanes to see the puck. These are, shots that are coming through. But, that is something they'll have to keep an eye on as well.
Absolutely.
But moving on, we have Calgary.
Yeah.
Who their their current record is 8-11-1. They finished the week with a 1-0 win over the Wild. A 2-1 win, overtime win versus the Coyotes, a 3-2 loss to the Blackhawks, and a 3-2 win versus the Red Wings.
Yeah, they're on a little bit of a roll. They did not start the season well, and part of that's down to Brian Elliott. For whatever reason, he has not been the greatest goalie this season. He's playing well below what he's capable of.
And I'm not sure why, because they had their backup step in front of the exact same team, and he stole a few wins this week.
I don't know. Elliott might be low on confidence. Whatever it is, Calgary needs him to snap out of that quick. But the main kind of story for Calgary this week was Johnny Gaudreau getting injured.
21 slashes from what I was reading on a few different websites. There was 21 slashes that were not called, and one of them led to his broken finger, which led to surgery, and now he's out for multiple weeks.
Yeah, which is an absolute shame because he is far and away one of their, I would say, top 3 players on that team. And he's the one that drives a lot of their scoring. And for him to be out is an absolute shame for that length of time. Now, a lot of teams have got a lot of their star players out, which has been pretty bad for the league. And people are saying it's because of the condensed season and whatnot, but we've seen condensed seasons before,
right?
And not this many injuries.
Yeah, I feel like it's just, if you ever watch European style of hockey, I look at the World Juniors, it was a few years ago when they were in Europe.
You can't get away with a lot of
any
stuff
of those little hand slashes, even the little pokes, they're called every single time.
Absolutely.
And Canada got called for those numerous amounts of time. On North America, those aren't called. Yep. They get away with those, so maybe they need to kind of look at the rules or do something there.
Well, and I think that's going to be part of some of the GM meetings going forward, is talking about whether or not they need to start calling slashes to the hands, like just the little ones, because you know what, those still hurt. They may not look like much, but they're getting a lot of weight behind that. These are guys that are in shape. They're not just taking a little poke at you. That's a pretty hard whack.
Especially when Gaudreau was wearing gloves designed for a 14-year-old.
Yes. Absolutely. And you know what? That's something that I know Don Cherry has always gone on about is how the gloves don't protect your hands enough compared to what they used to be in the 60s and the 70s and maybe even into the 80s. To that, I say, well, guys aren't slashing nearly as much as they probably used to be. You know, that used to be a way more violent game where, yeah, you probably did need the extra protection.
Yeah.
Aside from the head.
Especially with guys like Marty McSorley.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's a little bit different in that respect. But, yeah, they've got to start protecting the star players when it comes to that being whacked in the hand like that. Patrick Kane was asked about it the other day, and he says it happens to him all the time, and he absolutely hates it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that they're going to have to, whether it's the GM meetings or something, but I feel like it's something that they
Board
should.
Board of Governors.
Yeah, they're going to have to do something, and maybe start to call those penalties on those slashes. Maybe I don't know. It's going to be something that's going to have to be looked at, but there's no excuse for it. Especially not 21 on one player alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's tempting to use anything in your arsenal to throw off the star player. Like, just look at what Kadri did to McDavid a few weeks back. He was chirping him. He was doing every single little thing he could do to get him off his game. And if you think whacking Gaudreau in the hands every little bit is going to throw him off his game, you're going to do it. But at the same time, the NHL's got to protect his stars because their stars are their moneymakers.
Right. That's
why people show up. They show up to see Gaudreau do what he does, which in a lot of games and on a lot of nights is pretty darn impressive for someone his age and for his size.
You know, for sure, especially for, like you said, how young he is. However, the other big news out of Calgary this week from what I was seeing is apparently the Maple Leafs offered, I didn't see what the details were, but apparently the Maple Leafs were looking at acquiring Dougie Hamilton.
Oh, man, imagine if he ended up coming back to Toronto after Toronto traded all those picks away. The irony. But you know what? It's maybe not a bad deal for the Leafs to kick tires on that.
Depending on what they want for him.
If there's anything that they've got, it is a plethora of skilled wingers. Like, really skilled wingers. So if they can trade like maybe Brendan Leipsic, Kasperi Kapanen, and a second or third rounder for Dougie Hamilton, I'd say that's a pretty decent trade.
They would get some help on the back end that they desperately need.
Oh, man, do they need it. Do they ever need it? And it would be help now and for the future, provided he gets better. Because Dougie Hamilton is not a bad defenseman, but he's definitely not reaching his potential.
Not currently.
Yes, not currently. But he is only 23. Maybe give him a couple more years. But moving on, we have Edmonton, who finished off the week at 10-8-1. They played New York, where they lost 3-1. They played the Ducks, where they lost 4-1. They played the Kings, where they lost 4-2. And then they played the Stars, where they just so happened to win 5-2.
And all those nicknames, Connor McJesus, Connor this.
McSavior.
The new one that I heard this weekend was Connor McHattrick.
That is not shocking. But you know what? The biggest thing over that week was that they were not scoring, and they were letting in way too many goals.
Well, before the win against Dallas, Connor McDavid hasn't scored. He didn't score in 10 games.
Well, and let's just clarify the fact that most teams can score against the Stars because while their defense is not terrible, their goaltending tandem is not the strongest.
They're spending a lot of money on two half number ones, mostly
very
number twos.
Very average goalies.
They could have gone out and got a number one and saved the money, but that's another issue.
Absolutely.
But Edmonton's been playing decent hockey, but they just they weren't putting pucks in the back of the net. But who knows? Maybe with that win against the Stars, especially with their leader getting a hat trick, maybe it'll be rejuvenation and they'll go on another little tear like they did to start the year.
You know what? You can only hope, because as much as I love making fun of Edmonton, and I do, because to me it's just so hilarious to see them get all worked up about these high draft picks and still suck.
Yeah.
And as a Leafs fan, it makes me feel better. It's like going to like a state fair, like the Western Fair that we have. It's like going there and basically comparing other people's crap families to your own, and it makes you feel so much better. And that's what the Edmonton Oilers were to me for years. But you know what? They're finally starting to look up, and you know what? I'm pleased for them. I am.
Yeah, like I said to you last week too, I feel like, you know, Edmonton is going to be one of those teams that's going to surprise a lot of people, and they're going to come and they're going to place decently in the West.
They do need to go on a bit of a tear though, because 10-8-1 is not going to get them into the playoffs.
No, but you know, look at Anaheim last year. Look at a lot of these teams.
That's true, but Anaheim has a better team
for sure.
They just weren't playing well and weren't scoring.
That is for sure, but at the same time, it is still the first month of the season. We'll just finish the first month of the season.
It is. Yeah.
But other than that, I don't really think there was too much news really in the whole Edmonton front.
You know, aside from the fact they weren't scoring, then McDavid lit it up for 3 goals. Good on him, but I don't know. It bothers me when he does well because he's just expected to. You know, and I'm sure it's how people think of Sidney Crosby, except that Sidney Crosby has had to battle through a lot more adversity. And he still plays as well as he does.
Yeah. Sidney Crosby, that was like the debate we had last week.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how McDavid does, but you know what? He's got to fight through those bumps, and he broke out with 3 goals, but he's got to keep that up, you know.
And
so
I believe he still is at like a point per game currently. So he, hopefully he can keep that up. I feel like if he finishes, the year, doesn't get hurt, I think they're going to be in a good position.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, we have the horrendous Vancouver Canucks.
For as bad as they were, as bad as they are, their record, I thought they would have, for losing 9 straight, I thought they would have been a lot, worse off. But they're 7-10-2. They lost, they won 5-4 in overtime against Dallas.
Now, bear in mind, it's Dallas. Any team can score against them.
They lost 7-2 to the Rangers. They won 3-2 to the Coyotes, and they lost 4-3 in overtime to the Hawks.
When they were up by a couple of goals.
Yes.
The Hawks managed to come back.
That was all Marian Hossa.
for being, 36, 37? If not older, he's still chugging along.
And before this season, he was worried that he didn't have it left in him to continue and to score goals. He thought that he was done.
Oh, man, no, he is a key cog in the Chicago top 4 there. But Vancouver is, you know what, they've put together half decent weeks the last couple of weeks, but they are still not where they thought they would be, and Jim Benning has gone into reassuring the fan base, which isn't reassuring the fan base, it's just making them freak out more.
They've been playing well up until the 3rd period, and it makes me think of that saying, they're all Swedish but no Finnish. Which
to a large extent they are, but I don't know what it is with them, and I hope to God that they don't start trading away some of their top prospects to bring in proven guys to try and shore up that team, because that would be the absolute worst mistake they can make and would set them back another 5 to 10 years in worst case.
Which I feel like is what they are going through right now when they were trying to win back in 2010.
And yeah, exactly. And you know what? The ownership needs to step up, and because the way that things went, I'm going to bring this back to Toronto because everything comes back to Toronto. But management was afraid that the fans would not put up with a scorched earth policy, and Toronto has proved that you can do that with the right fan base, with a loyal fan base, which Vancouver has. They've got a very loyal fan base.
Yes, they do.
And as long as they do what the Leafs did, which is where you sell hope. That's because that's all you've got. Yeah. Because you literally have one of the worst teams in the league.
They have nothing but hope.
Yeah, exactly. A little better now, but they're going to end up being in the Nolan Patrick sweepstakes come the end of the season, and just the way that they're going, there can be no other definitive solution other than they've got to start drafting well. They've got to start getting more prospects, trade away whatever you can trade away from their older lineup, and get whatever you possibly can, whether it's just a bunch of low-end draft picks, and hope that you nail one or two of them, and just start offloading a lot of their contracts. They are not in good contract situation.
No, the Sedins, they're getting a little too old. They're not performing.
$14 million for the two of them, and they might have a good game 1 in 3.
Yeah,
1 in 3 games,
and that might only be one of the two of them that has a good game.
Exactly. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch for the rest of the season.
It's going to be, they're going to be sellers, I think, for the rest of the year.
Pardon my language, but they are an absolute shit show, and it is really entertaining to watch. Just watch them burn. But anyways, that finishes up the roundup for the Canadian teams. What we're going to spend a little more time talking about this week, though, is the importance of drafting your core and having those draft picks coming through to solidify your team and your core.
Yeah, you look at teams like Chicago who, they've drafted extremely well over the last 5-10 years. You get guys like Patrick Kane, you get guys like Jonathan Taves. They have an amazing, general manager who not only drafts well, but also ends up helping, somehow stays within the cap and gets guys at the deadline, does this. And then, you look at, for example, being a Colorado Avalanche fan, you look at teams, like Colorado, where, other than a few years, like 2009, in 2009 where they drafted Duchesne, Ryan O'Reilly, Tyson Barrie, that was probably the best draft year they've had.
But only 2 out of those 3 are still there.
Right. And, you look at some of the other years, they might have got one guy in every year that maybe played some decent hockey, but a lot of these guys either fizzled out or are career AHL players.
Or playing in Europe.
Or in Europe. And they're just, as much as I love Colorado, that, last few years they have had better drafts, but it's something that, it comes down to your general manager and, if you want to emulate success that Chicago's doing, the draft is where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially in the salary cap era, you have to draft well, because the whole idea of drafting is that you're getting these players that punch above their weight for the first few years. And they are the people that flesh out your lineup. They give you the high-end skill for maybe $1 million a year plus maybe bonuses, right? So when you look at it, when I look at a team like Colorado, I see the potential that they have that is not being utilized. And what I also see is poor drafting. And the reason I say that there's poor drafting, you mentioned Tyson Barrie. Who else have they really drafted for the back end? Yeah, they did draft Kevin Shattenkirk back in, I think that was 2007, but they traded him for Eric Johnson, who has not really fulfilled his potential. He's a solid D-man. He's maybe a 3-4, but he hasn't become that 1-2 defenseman.
He is playing well. He's not what they expected. I mean, he's still better than, above average. Like he's a decent defenseman, but there's for some reason every year comes and they draft another center or another winger when they need help on the back end. And their back end is their biggest issue. One of their best defensemen right now is Francois Beauchemin, and he's up there in age.
He's, what, 36,
30,
37?
Yeah, something like that.
He's not young.
Then the other guys they have to rely on are, Nikita Zadorov, Chris Bigra, all these guys who are 20 years old who haven't really filled out their bodies or their potential yet, and they're being almost relied upon because they have no other help.
Absolutely. And I would say the other thing that I find kind of astounding about them is that they're, apart from their core, they've got Landeskog, they've got Duchesne, they've got McKinnon. Who else for the forwards?
Barrie, Duchesne, or you can also slump Johnson in there as well.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of the forwards, they've got their three main forwards, and then they rely a fair amount on Jerome McGinley, who is getting up there in
He's
age.
now on the fourth line, though.
Yeah.
So the thing is Carl Soderberg is probably one of their best pickups that they've got.
But they had to go to free agency for him, and he's not young.
Right, but...
He's what, 30, 31?
He's, I think, 32. But at the same time, he put up a career year last year as well.
He did. Well, it's because he's playing in probably more of an advanced role than he was with Boston. But this is what I'm saying, though, is that I feel that this is what it looks like from an outsider's perspective, that a lot of their team, a lot of their forward group, I should say, is built up through free agent acquisitions or trades, but mainly through, it seems like, slightly older free agents.
Yeah, it's something that at the trade deadline, they're never usually buyers, but they're also never usually sellers.
Yeah. They
usually just get a couple budget guys, and I feel like the ownership needs to change, and the ownership needs to, stop limiting.
Yeah, because they've got their internal cap. And imagine how much better they would be if they still had Ryan O'Reilly.
They would be much better defensively because
Absolutely.
he's one of the better defensive centers.
Sorry to cut you off. When they had their good season about, 3 years ago, was Ryan O'Reilly still there?
It was the last time they made the playoffs, I believe Ryan O'Reilly was still there. And mind you, that was also the year that McKinnon ended up, scoring like 60 points in his first year. The whole team was firing, and they were playing solid defensively. But at the same time, Varlamov was the pretty much the number one goalie with shots against, and he was one of the only players in NHL history to have that many shots against, be at the bottom of the league, but be in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's they were kind of, that was a house built on sand, it seemed. And you know what? I think that was maybe more just due to Patrick Waugh and the system that he put in place, because it seemed, again, as an outsider, seemed a lot more run and gun. It wasn't very structured. It seemed to...
He tried to use the speed of the forwards and the defense, because Tyson Barrie is one of the fastest skaters. Basically, his philosophy was dump and chase, which didn't really work all the time. Or, it's pretty much get the puck, try and get up to the forwards, and just try and go. But when it didn't work, you're facing 30 shots a game, and they barely had the puck the whole game.
To me, in that instance, it sounds like they tried to do what Pittsburgh did last season without the execution that Pittsburgh did it with.
Well, I mean, Pittsburgh does that at a whole nother level, though.
Well, that's what I mean, but they've got more team speed. Colorado, I feel like, has too much youth and too much veteran presence.
There's no in-between.
Yeah, exactly. There's no one really in their prime that has that high-end speed to be able to play that kind of game.
Which is, they do need to draft some more defensemen, but Tyson Jost, they got this year. We watched the draft. We saw, his grandfather cried. It made me cry.
That gave me the feels, let me tell you.
But, there are some guys that are coming up eventually that, that could turn the tide, but they need to go defensive heavy the next 2, 3, 4 drafts and try and get some guys that will solidify that back end.
But this is what I mean in terms of how crucial the draft is these days, is that they didn't draft well, really, between, about 05 and 2010. They didn't really, aside from 09, that was a particularly good year, they haven't really hit it out of the park.
No,
they haven't gotten any either really good bottom six forwards. They haven't gotten any, gems from the rough, right? They haven't had any of those 6th round picks come out of nowhere.
The only, other than 2009, the only really good draft pick they got was the shortened season where they finished dead last, and they happened to fall upon, Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah. So it's that sort of thing that shows just how crucial it is. Like, you look at Chicago, and for them, their drafting started in, I think, about 2002, and that was when they drafted Duncan Keith. And then you look at the next season, and they drafted Brent Seabrook, Corey Crawford, and Dustin Byfuglien in 245th overall. Like, that's pretty late in the draft to get someone that's doing as well as he is now. But then the next season they get Dave Bolin, Brian Bickle, Troy Brouwer. These have been solid players. And going forward from that, they kept drafting, and they just kept hitting at least one or two players that became crucial to them over the next few seasons. They got in 2005, they got Nicholas Hjalmarsson at 108th overall, who is one of their key top 4 defensemen. They then the next year got Jonathan Toews at 1st overall. Next year they got Patrick Kane. Sorry, at 3rd overall for Jonathan Toews, 1st overall for Patrick Kane. But you see how consistently year over year they kept drafting these players that eventually became key cogs in their Stanley Cup winning teams.
Yeah, and again, who is to say too back then that guys like Dustin Byfuglien or guys like I'm pretty sure Seabrook was drafted pretty high, but some of these later round picks, they don't always turn out, but it seems like they hit, like you said, like a diamond in the rough multiple times.
You have to though. This is the thing, is that you've got to be able to have that scouting staff in place to be able to pick out these players. And Tampa Bay is another fantastic example of that, because you look at guys like Andre Palat, who was picked in, I think, the 5th or 6th round. Tyler Johnson, who wasn't even drafted.
Yeah.
Get Nikita Kucherov as well, who I think was maybe 4th or 5th round.
Vladislav Nemesnikov.
Yeah, exactly. You've got all these guys that are now key players and really excellent players in the league that they drafted from later rounds. And that's what you have to do these days. And unless you do that, you end up being like a team like Edmonton or like Colorado.
And I think one of the other things that's the issue with Colorado too is they never finish low enough to get guys like Jonathan Toews,
absolutely,
like Patrick Kane. The one year they did, they got a guy like McKinnon.
Yep.
2009, they kind of did. They drafted 3rd. They got Duchesne. But you look at those years where they got Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews.
Yep.
That's good scouting, but that's also a lot of luck.
There's some luck.
Them finishing
absolutely.
Bottom tier. And guys like Toews and Kane
like
falling to number 3 in your lap the year that you don't do well.
Well, and you look at who they could have drafted in 2009 if they'd been in the 1 or 2 spot. They could have had John Tavares or Victor Hedman.
Yeah.
2 unreal players that they could have had. But hey, they got Matt Duchesne, who's a very good player, but he's just not quite on that level.
Hopefully he picks it up. I mean, last year was the first time he hit 30 goals.
Which, I don't know, man. He's got to be hitting more goals than that.
Which he's their leading scorer already this year. He missed 4 games with a concussion. Still the leading scorer. He's back tonight. The game just started against Columbus. If he can put up another 30, 35, 40 goals, then he's going to be, he's going to be a decent player. Mind
Absolutely.
you, he's more of a well-balanced player. He's not more of a pure goal scorer. But McKinnon's starting to play well. They did get some good solid draft pieces.
Yep.
It's just they don't have anything in the draft from the back end.
And Rantanen is coming up as well. He's getting a little bit better. So hopefully he will continue to progress and maybe add some more of that secondary scoring that they just haven't had.
And he has played well so far in the years that he has played. In the games he has played this year, sorry.
Yeah, so hopefully that will continue, but otherwise, you know what? We'll maybe leave it off there for now, because this is a topic that you could endlessly debate.
We could go over multiple teams. We
Absolutely.
could go over each team. We could spend an hour on Colorado alone, go all the way back to the year that they first moved to Colorado. But we should finish it here and keep it for next week so we can keep you guys interested.
Absolutely. So we're going to sign off for now, and we will talk to you next week.